All right. So, hello again. Welcome back from lunch. I hope you had a good lunch. I'm quite full myself. So, this is the second session for today. Today's second session is called User Experience Design and Innovation, Prototyping. Stop Wishing, Start Making by Mr. Simon Heather. He's the Senior Business Design Lead at IDEO New York, and obviously the session will be conducted in English. So before we begin the conference, may I ask all of you to fill out the evaluation form after every session, and just a reminder, we have only one evaluation form. So if you're in session 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you can just fill all that out in one form, and then you can give it out to the registration area right in front as you walk out. So just a quick introduction. Mr. Simon Heather is a senior design lead and business designer at IDEO New York. At IDEO, he has worked with new ventures and Fortune 500 companies in creating business opportunities and growth, and to bring new offerings to the market, and a leading design of products. And also he has designed applications and services worldwide and internationally across numerous industries, including retail, finance, luxury, media, healthcare, so just a plethora and a wide variety of things. As a New Yorker, as a person who lived in London, also a person who has lived in Tokyo, in Japan, he's also constantly on the lookout for cross-cultural pollination. So, without further ado, may I welcome Mr. Simon Heather onto the stage, please. Big round of applause.
Hello everybody, it's great to be here. I'm just waiting for my slides to come up. Can we get that? Ah, perfect. Hello, Sawat D. Krupp, very nice to be here today. I've come all the way from New York to be here, and I'm really excited to be in Thailand again. It's been a few years since I was last here. That was a lovely introduction. Yes, my name is Simon Heather. And I'm a senior business design lead at IDEO New York. And essentially what that means is I lead teams of designers to develop new products, services, and brands. And essentially, we design user experiences at IDEO. Business design essentially is something that we look at the overlap between what makes for a great user experience and also what makes for a great sort of sustainable business model. And before we get into our topic today, I thought I'd share with you a little bit around where I work. IDEO, it's a very famous kind of design company in the States. We actually started off as an industrial design company probably 20, 30 years ago. Very well known for the early products that we designed with companies like Apple, HP, for example. And we became very well known for the kind of process and methodology that we use in design. So much so that we were actually asked to apply it to different types of touch points. So designing brands, services, spaces, also organizations as well. So we help organizations grow their innovation capabilities by working with them to develop culture and team dynamics in their organizations. And then these days we work a lot more designing ventures as well. So our San Francisco office has got a startup lab where we have new ventures come in to work at IDEO. We help them grow and sort of get ready for market. So it's a very unique place, and since I've come all this way, I thought I'd share with you a little bit around what it's like to be at IDEO. The last 2 weeks, actually, I've been using my mobile phone to snap a few clips, and so I thought I'd share with you kind of what the office environment is like, because it's a big piece of the culture of IDEO.
Get ready.
So we're down in Chinatown, downtown New York. I don't know who that is, but yeah. So yeah, that's where I work, and I promise you, I do work. It's not all just puppies and ice cream, although that's a very fun part of it. What I really wanted to get across, though, was this kind of what I think of as the IDEO circus. We have a lot of interesting people that work there from many different disciplines and backgrounds. I work with interaction designers, product designers, graphic designers, writers, anthropologists, all sorts of people, and we believe that really by fostering many different points of view around problems, we'll come up with more interesting design solutions. A few other things that we believe. So can I just get a sense of who's in the room? Has anyone seen this before? This framework? So maybe one. Okay, so actually not so many, because I think there's quite a few designers and there's quite a few entrepreneurs in the room. This is essentially our process by which we design. It's often called design thinking, or human-centered design. And essentially what we do is we apply several different lenses when we approach problem solving. So the first one is around people. It's about desirability, and we look for, what are the inherent needs of people, because we're going to design towards those, and at the same time designing what's going to be financially viable as a business. And then because a lot of innovation depends on the technology in the time in which that innovation was released, we'll look to understand what's technologically feasible as well. And we believe that great innovation happens really at the intersection of all three of those lenses. And because we always start with people, we spend a lot of time in context getting to know people, because we think that to develop empathy is a great way to get inspired by the people that you're designing for. Often they aren't you, right? So having a chance to get to know them, to meet them at their homes, is a really good way to kind of get a sense of intuition and experience about what you're designing for. And in this example, this is actually in Peru. That's Noriko, who's showing us her family history. And what's nice about doing research like this is that you wouldn't get to see this. You wouldn't uncover these things about people just by being in a room, an office room, doing like a focus group. So it's important to kind of get into context and meet people in where they live and where they work. And so we also build a lot, right? So in each one of our offices, we have what's called a make space. So this is actually what it looks like in New York. A lot of different tools on the wall. We like to tinker and we like to make, because at some points, discussion is enough, and we want to show each other our ideas more tangibly. And so that really brings me on to the topic of conversation today, which is prototyping, to stop wishing and to start making. And I think it's really the most powerful kind of piece of a designer's toolkit. Working over the last few years with dozens of clients, big and small, startups and entrepreneurs, as well as big Fortune 500 companies, I've seen that prototyping is a really powerful tool. And often at the beginning of a project, we'll speak to our clients and we'll sit down and ask them, what ideas have you explored? And, we've tried this, we've tried that. Yeah, of course we've tried that. And then I'll ask to see them. I'll ask, well, okay, can you show me what you're talking about? And that's where they get stuck, because, we haven't actually made anything. We've just talked about it a lot. So what I think is really great about prototyping is it moves you from thinking and from hypothesizing into action and actually into a position where you can get feedback from your users. And people turn into this guy. So just another show of hands. Does anyone know who this is? Kind of. No, a few people. So MacGyver, he's a kind of Western icon, a bit of an action man. And really, we use him a lot as an analogy because he really kind of embodies the amazing invention that you see in prototyping. It's a TV character, and he always finds himself in sticky situations that he manages to design himself out of. So here he's grabbing candlestick, microphone wire, and then he creates a defibrillation device to kind of resuscitate his friend. So kind of incredible invention. And we always call this like MacGyvering when prototyping is exceptionally good, because that's what it feels like. It can feel quite hectic. We like to think of it as, we've MacGyvered that. So today, let's get our invention on. And I'm going to share with you a few things. What do we mean by prototype? I'll give you lots of different examples, a lot of content to show you, why we make prototypes, and then I'll walk through a case study which I think will be very interesting for you. So what is a prototype? Okay, let's start with the definition because obviously it can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So for us, we think of it as a question embodied, right? So in the room right now, there's entrepreneurs, we have designers and business folk, and you'll probably have ideas that you want to explore about your business or about your, the app that you're working on. Perhaps, you own a retail shop and you're interested in exploring what it would be like to have a bespoke service. You have a hypothesis about something. And so we always tend to begin with these big questions. And these are just a few of the questions that we've talked about and explored over the last few months at IDEO. So just to show you how they can be very big and broad and expansive, exploratory. Something like, how should we reward our fans for their loyalty? This was a question that came to us from a massive stadium in New York. And then down to something more tailored and a little bit more kind of nuanced, like, do people want their medical advice in a playful or a clinical tone of voice? So you can see that the first one is very, very exploratory, very expansive. It could go in so many different directions. But the second one is a little bit more nuanced. Is it clinical or is it playful? And prototyping really is like this iterative process whereby we are designing and putting it in front of people and learning from their feedback and then iterating upon that design. So at IDEO, we use a few different modes when we're prototyping. The first one we call rapid prototyping. Now, I think this one's really important because when we talk about prototypes, often companies that we work with think of it as something very, what we would call high resolution, which is where it's almost fully articulated, it's very close to the final thing. But rapid for us is where it's very scrappy, could be sketches, could be pieces of foam core stuck together to give an impression of what the product looks like. And typically at this phase of prototyping, we're exploring many different ideas and themes. And we show it to a handful of people just to get an idea of, does this have legs? And should we take it forward? And it's very cheap and very quick to do. You could do this in half an hour. Live prototyping, on the other hand, is a little bit more involved. That's where we already have some sense that the ideas we're working on have legs, and we want to see what would it look like to up the resolution slightly, and then put this and begin to simulate sort of market conditions, where we would then mix a sort of combination of qualitative research and quantitative research. We're gathering a bit of data at this moment. And importantly, it's in a native context. So perhaps it's putting the prototype in a retail environment with real sales traffic. And then all the way to piloting, which is where we may have one idea that we want to really blow out. Maybe we launch a pilot store, for example, or our site, we make it go live for a few hours or a few months just to sort of see. Like, this is often also called to be in beta or beta, where it's out there and it's working, functioning, and you're iterating on it as you go. So today, as I show you some examples, I'd love you to think about, what kind of burning questions you might have for your customers, or about the ideas that you're working on that you'd like to prototype towards. So you can prototype anything. So I'm going to show you a few examples. We're in the business of user experience design, and so we'll prototype anything. These are just a few examples. This is not a comprehensive list, but these are the ones that come up the most, where we're prototyping physical products, maybe digital apps, websites, digital experiences. We'll do environments like retail environments, office environments we'll prototype in, services and roles, and then things that are more abstract, things like business models and brands. I'll start with physical form, because that's probably the most common. And what I like about this is you can really see how we're using a bunch of different methods as we up in resolution. We're asking different questions. So this is Sam Adams. They're a beer brand in the States, and they asked us to redesign the beer handle in the bar. And as you can see at the beginning, we're exploring shape and form. That's stuff that's made out of foam, and then it's hand sanded. In the middle, we're kind of upping the resolution slightly. We're bringing in color. What's the right shade of blue at this moment? And now it's 3D printed and powder dusted. And then towards the end, these are actually cast in acrylic, where you're getting closer to a production-ready prototype. And we'll also use a lot of, this is actually a picture of a number of different diabetes starter kits. So this is a pharma project that I worked on, where we wanted to give people that were newly diagnosed with diabetes, a great experience when they heard this kind of quite sometimes like news that's very hard to take. And these prototypes here are made out of a combination, again, of cardboard, foam core, printed materials. There's a couple more of them there, just so you can kind of see how they're constructed. And these are made over the course of a couple of days. And the beauty of having several different prototypes at once is that you can have them compare and contrast. You can have your users that you invite for an interview to check out your prototypes and then say what they like about different pieces. And then this actually ended up being kind of cobbled together. These two pieces were the favorite of the 7. And this went on to win a design award, actually, for sort of great product design. Digital products. This is one, of course, many of us already know, I'm sure. Any interaction designers or designers in the room. Again, we use different methodologies at different moments in the process. Always starting with sketches, just to explore the basic value of the idea. Putting those with, this was actually, this is an app for doctors, and we showed this a lot of sketches to a number of different doctors to see what they would find valuable about it. And you can do that very quickly, learning what they would like. We would then come back a week later with these mid-resolution prototypes that at this moment they now have some interaction. So now we're programming buttons to work so that you get a sense of what's the flow, how's this app structured, and how do I use it? Before you spend a lot more time, what we would call pixel pushing, where you spend more time getting more detailed and nuanced about the final visual appearance of the design.
Cue music. So this is possible dance moves for Monster Maker. So music starts, and I'm the player, so I come in and I touch the monster, and he gives me a special dance move. I go and touch again, and he does a different one. And it can go for as long as I want. It has a few signature moves. And when I've had enough and I'm done dancing, I touch the back button. It pauses and the music stops. Monster Maker.
Cool.
That's all I can. Come on, Sonic.
Wow.
So that's funny, actually. This is I love showing this video because this is actually done by the Toy Lab in Palo Alto, which is a specialized team within IDEO that works on projects for toys. And they wanted to give the sense of what an interaction would feel like for this app idea they had for a toy company. And you can see that a sketch would not suffice in this moment. So they quickly threw this together, showed it to the executives, and it ended up becoming Elmo's Monster Maker. So it's a nice way to show you that you can actually, there's a lot of different methods that you can use to actually prototype an idea and see if it has legs. Now, this is where I think it gets more interesting. I know that there is a lot of focus today around the idea of services, and this is something that we do a lot of at IDEO, and it tends to get very complicated. It's very hard to do, to prototype this. It involves a lot of choreography. So think about being a wedding planner almost in the amount of organization it takes to actually fake a service, because you're taking the place and you're prototyping an infrastructure that does not exist. And in this particular case, this was actually a couple of months ago, a project I worked on for Madison Square Garden, a big stadium in New York, and they wanted to explore that question of what would it look like to have food and beverage in seat for some of their fans. And so we hired some of their basketball fans, and to the backdrop of a live game, we prototyped this service. So we would ping them, here's the menu for tonight, would you like to order something? They reply back, and then in the top right panel, that's my teammate Vivian. She takes the order manually, she's sitting right behind them to receive their order, writing it down on a piece of paper, handing it to a runner, who then goes off, gets the food, and then mans this food station, and then they would go and get another ping, and then they would go and pick up the food afterwards. So all of this kind of activity to kind of fake the idea of this service, and it's important to do it in the context of a live game, because we quickly learned that they're so distracted by the game on court, they don't want to be disturbed or bothered by this annoying pinging, and this, so the food gets cold. So immediately we could see that logistically this would be a very, very difficult service to pull off. But we can try other ideas after this one. But that's what this is what I like to think of. I made this badge. I love the sticker, so I thought I'd use this. Service roles is another thing. So, this is the Today Show. It's a very famous morning TV show, again in New York, and it's filmed live to a Plaza audience. So behind the studio, you can see people in the background. There's a big plaza at Rockefeller Center where people can stand in the background and watch what's happening. There's also a viewership of 5 million people. And for this show, they felt like the Plaza experience wasn't as engaging as it could be. And we began to think about this in terms of, well, the TV show is very well produced. What would it look like if we produced the Plaza experience in the same way? And a few ideas came out, like trying elaborate welcome entrances and photo booths to make the experience more engaging. But then this idea of a Plaza producer, so this is a particular role, a job that someone would play, came about. And this is, I'm going to show you now, we prototyped this. So
Perfect.
that's Alex, he's a designer at IDEO. He's basically gets up early, plays this role, so a combination of acting skills here. And so he's vetting the crowd to see who would be good to feature in the show.
Weather across the country in the 80s and 90s, but we're looking at 85 degrees in our big city of the day, Honolulu, Hawaii. Enjoy the rest of your time in New York.
We're going to bring everyone back around. Thank you so much.
So this kind of facilitation for this particular experience was what we felt would move the needle most on the Plaza experience. This connection of having the chance as an audience member to connect with someone, not just one of the celebrities on the cast, but actually a crew member was enough to really move the needle in terms of making it a memorable experience. So Alex actually, in a rare turn of events, after this project, got hired by NBC to play this role. So he's now there full time, and you can follow him. So environments, this is actually something that I think in Thailand I could see people being very good at, because you can build very, very quickly here. This is a store that we made out of foam core, actually. So everything that you see here is essentially, it's kind of like cardboard. We hired in some furniture and mocked up the walls. They're all made out of foam core as well as the shelving. So very, very cheap to do, very quick. And this was for Everlane. So Everlane is an online retailer in America, and they were interested in moving to the retail space. What would it look like, they asked, to take what's distinctive about our online service and to transpose that to a physical retail environment? Well, to actually do that, it's kind of a daunting thing to go and open a store. It could cost $100,000. It's to fit out a store when you don't really know what's going to work could be a very costly investment. And so when they came to us, we actually sent a team of designers out to Everlane, and we found out that they had this great garage space below their headquarters in San Francisco. And so here you see the team over the course of, I think, 36 hours prototyping a retail environment very, very quickly and very, very cheaply. And then they invited people to come and check this out. And unexpected things started happening. People loved the idea of being able to find product that was only in the HQ branch that they couldn't find online. They started Snapchatting, social media went a little bit crazy, and more people came to check out the store. So already things were beginning to spiral without having made any investment in a physical store. So a very powerful thing to do, because you know that you're set up for success rather than spending a lot of money and it not working out. How do you prototype something a little bit more abstract, like a business model? Well, this is a nice example where we were working with a major retailer in the US, and they were interested in exploring what would it be like to have a pharmacy unit within their stores. So here you can kind of see a foam core, again, it's our favorite material, a foam core scale model featuring different modules and units. And the executive team, they wanted to understand, well, what's the impact going to be like on our business model? What's the revenue going to be like? So at the same time, you can see this is Doug. He's a business designer at IDEO. And you can see the scale model, and every time we explored different formats of the store, different configurations, he would update his Excel model almost in real time using historical data to kind of give some form of estimate of what the store revenue would look like once we move different things, different pieces in and out. So that was kind of a nice way to prototype the impact on the business. Another thing is brands. So brands, again, very abstract. You're looking at style, tone of voice, feel. These are all very difficult things for any person to really describe, anyone who's not in the business of brand or design, for them to kind of describe. So what we tend to do is we tend to put several different, very polarized directions, brand prototypes, in front of people again, so that they have something to talk about, so they can react to them. This is actually an example, my teammate Vivian, who you saw earlier at Madison Square Garden. She's just finished this project like a week ago, and it's actually for maggots. So they've been working, our philanthropic arm, IDEO.org, has been working with a startup in Tanzania to help people gather and harvest maggots to be used as chicken feed. And the team thought, well, maggots sound so gross. Let's make this a very sterile brand. So they went for number 2. They designed that, and realizing that they're not from Tanzania, they designed a few other brands just to kind of have people determine which they like the most. So number 1 is really celebrating heritage farming in Tanzania. Number 2 is that sort of sterile, sort of safe-looking one, very utilitarian. Number 3 kind of gets at the modern feel. Number 4 is playful, aimed at children. Number 5 is aspirational, sort of middle-class family. And then number 6 really sort of celebrates local craft. And the one that really resonated actually was number 1. People really loved the idea of the heritage and aspired to the farming lifestyle in Tanzania. So I know I've shown you quite a lot, but as you can kind of see, you really can make anything come to life through prototyping. And just to kind of reiterate some of the reasons that you saw as to why it's a good practice, user feedback is always king, right? So again, this is the diabetes kit. I think this one's very powerful because it's one of those examples where when we showed this prototype to people, we weren't dealing with, we were researching with people who had diabetes and they'd had it for a while. And we wanted to get the sense of what would it have been like for you to have had a starter kit or a kit like this when you were first diagnosed with diabetes. So putting this in front of them took them right back to that time, that situation, and feelings of angst, feelings of failure because they haven't adhered to diets. These are all feelings and fear that sort of came through. So it was important for us to kind of surface this because it made us realize that we needed to make things very, very simple, stripped of complexity to make it an effective design. And that's what happens. It turns into a collaboration, so a co-design with your user. And actually, again, here, we were designing for multiple stakeholders, really. We were designing for patients, but also doctors. And so that's a doctor's hands that you can kind of see in the photograph. And what they wanted from such a product was different than what was wanted by the end user. So we ended up making it a tool, a device that could actually foster a conversation around diabetes and the idea of adhering to insulin between patients and doctors. As you can probably tell, I'm a big advocate for this one with the examples that I showed you earlier. But really, prototyping is really good because it saves you time and money and costly errors. And this is actually us prototyping in Australia for a beer company and testing it in bars, so in live context environments, testing out the different ideas for beer products. And we actually tested 8 different concepts at 11 different venues over the course of 6 weeks. And the actual cost to actually do this was very, very little in comparison to the amount of money that the company had been paying to retool their factory and release and market new products that had ended in failure. So by doing this, we were able to quickly make an innovation pipeline that they could work on that was user-tested and user-validated to some degree. It's also great, to build confidence in an idea or course correct. So time and time again, I've seen my clients get so excited when they're out in the field, they're putting ideas in front of people and beginning to get some of that user feedback. And then at the same time, there are times where ideas get abandoned. So these photos here are an example of when an airline company approached us, and they had been working on this idea of a cabin where you would sleep bunk bed style on top of each other. And it sounded great on paper. They'd already committed to designing it, and they had blueprints. And immediately, that very afternoon, we prototyped it. So we made up like a plain interior with foam core. And as you can see here, we prototyped the idea of having bunk beds. And it looks pretty tight, right? So instantly, it was like the idea of the feeling of claustrophobia was palpable almost immediately, to the fact where the executive team abandoned the project immediately and they had to course correct. But just a very valuable learning to happen at that stage in time. Imagine them kind of blowing that out and building a cabin, then finding out after they've sunk hundreds of thousands of dollars into it. And then there are also things that just happen. You just couldn't possibly predict, right? So the Everlane example, this example, it's a nice one. Some things you just can't predict, right? So I've shown you kind of a range of different examples, and I thought it might be useful to show you prototyping in practice across the entirety of a whole project. This is one that we did with a bank, a Canadian bank, but we did this in Latin America. And they approached us because they wanted us to look at the user experience within their branches. They felt that the branch experience wasn't great and there was potential to kind of improve it. The initial sort of starting point was around the idea of, well, queuing is a serious problem in Latin America. Let's make these branches more efficient. Let's optimize traffic flow. And we thought there may be other things, other sort of areas that we could explore. So we spent quite a few weeks, maybe 4 weeks in Latin America, getting to know people. So spending time interviewing people about their financial practices, financial behavior, shadowing them to the bank. This is where the ethnography comes in. Shadowing them to the bank to see how they would do things, and getting an understanding of their financial practices. Speaking to experts, and also testing services, other services outside of banking, to see how developed they were in Latin America. And one of the stories that really emerged was, so that's Maria. That's actually in Santiago in Chile. And she's someone that really kind of epitomized an opportunity that we saw. So she was someone that really had been, she'd been sold a product when she came into a bank that she couldn't possibly afford. And it was her lack of knowledge, her lack of awareness, where she was this was taken advantage of her. So she felt that this information imbalance, was something that had ended up penalizing her, and she was then sidelined years later, unable to kind of participate because of bad debt, unable to participate in the financial system. And so we thought, what if we could actually then, if education is such a big theme, what if we could activate the branch to be a place of learning and also connection, and for it not to be just about transactions. So she was sold to, could it actually be more about connecting around people's needs? So a bunch of different ideas emerged from that. And there's quite a few of them, but I'll just show you just 3 that we ended up prototyping. These are the sketches, and this is the prototype in store as well. So this is the learning wall. So we had this idea that, what if every time someone entered the branch, we could have this goal that by the time they left, not only would they be happy customers, but they would have learned something either about the financial system or about how to be a better customer, how to bank better in their branch. The wall space hadn't been activated in the branch itself, and so we thought this was a perfect opportunity to create a learning wall that told rich customer stories of how people had turned their finances around, having staff tips, and then also advertising events, learning events around finance and about using banks. The idea of a social space came up as well, because we were looking at queue optimization, but it felt like every other bank branch was doing the same thing. And we thought, well, let's actually try and explore something different, something that changes the energy in the space, something that acknowledges the fact that, actually, I'm sorry, this is kind of the way things are right now, you are going to have to wait. There's only so much that technology can do to push that optimization level up at this moment. So we felt, let's try something different. Let's try a social space, a hub where the bankers would emerge from the kind of glass walls and actually be able to meet people and customers and greet them in the space of the branch itself and have conversations in an open forum rather than kind of behind these glass walls. And then the idea of having a person dedicated to customer service. So we called it initially the Service Ninja. We wanted this guy to be monitoring user experience throughout and making sure that customers' needs were always attended to. Kind of like a sweeper in football, someone that picks up and just is always kind of attentive to that. So we ran a 2-day live prototype in Mexico with a number of different users. We had 8 people come in, and the types of people, and this is important, like when you're recruiting people to see your prototypes, you don't necessarily just want a core user. It may be that you want someone who is disenfranchised, who hates the product. It may be someone who loves it, someone very extreme, because you're going to learn a lot more things from those types of people than you will do from someone who just goes, yeah, that's good, I like it. So we look to recruit people that are kind of on the edges, the behavior may be on the edges. So people like Maria, who I spoke about earlier. And then for this kind of prototype, we would then walk them through the experience, because it's not finished yet, so some imagination is required to kind of see it and squint at it to see it working for real. But at the same time, the beauty of doing a live prototype like this was that you can also have intercept interviews as well, which is what we did. So this is us kind of like building out the prototype. meeting users in the space and showing them some of the concepts, having them interact with this guy, the customer service ninja. So, I mean, I thought it'd be just interesting to show you like the before and afters as well. So, because there is a lot of logistics that goes into prototyping stuff like this, and here you see like the bank branch before. All you see as you come in is the teller window, and usually there's queues out the door. You know, there's a lot of marketing and regulations that are using the wall space right now. That wall space is not really being used in any meaningful way, and kind of cluttered and redundant. And then staff are hidden behind these glass walls, kind of inaccessible. Like when you come into a bank branch, sometimes it's intimidating enough, but then to have to kind of go behind a glass curtain can be quite difficult. So we wanted to change that up by having the idea of a social space. And so quite quickly with furniture, with foam core, with printed material, we're able to prototype kind of like a brand new environment. Sometimes we would do this in an empty space as well. That way you have more control. But the beauty of this was that we had, you know, real traffic coming through, and we could get a good understanding of how people would interact with these concepts. So another thing that's very important, of course, in prototyping is the questions that you ask. And the things that we would probe for are things around like, you know, what's the core value? How is this resonating? For us, it was about learning. How do users feel about this? How do people feel about it? Are the communication visuals and the tone of language that we are using, are they resonating with people? Or is it kind of disingenuous for us as a bank to be communicating in a sort of warm, inclusive way? Should it be more professional? So we had questions around that. And then things like the level of information, you know, and the first impressions versus how long this sort of concept would last and how often it would need to be changed. And so after every prototype, and this is a practice that you can do, is that we would spend time reflecting to learn. So that's us doing a download with the bank branch after every day. And what we'll do is we'll share what's called top fives. We quickly go around the room and we see what really popped for us and what might we change immediately. One of the things that we changed immediately, for example, was the Scotia Ninja, the service ninja. We changed it to a concierge. The word ninja didn't really resonate in Latin America that we found. And originally, in his original incarnation, we bought him an apron so that he would look more distinctive. But when he went to ask someone if they wanted help, they said, well, what are you going to do? You're going to serve me sushi or something? So it didn't really work. And he quickly felt embarrassed, and we wanted to include him in this prototype. So we made him wear a suit instead. And the core idea for us, though, is that learning really did resonate. It really did go down well and felt like a fresh and generous take on the in-branch experience. In particular, the idea of running events in a bank branch around learning was kind of not heard of. No bank branch was doing this in Latin America. And these are ideas that made it forward into the final design. So what happens next after that live prototype is we would then go off and create a blueprint, perhaps a render. This is kind of getting closer to a final design that would inform a pilot. And here you can see, like, actually, we went crazy with the idea of learning. Because it resonated so well, we plastered it across all of the walls and created what we called a learning ribbon, which is the red ribbon going around the entire bank branch. And we kind of pared down the level of information so it was more bite-sized. And people, they would come in on a mission when they're visiting the bank branch, in and out. So we wanted to make it simple and accessible. We de-emphasized the idea of transactions. So you can see that you can't actually see the teller windows in this render. And what you see instead is a welcome desk where you're greeted by the concierge. And in the middle is where the social hub would now exist, kind of the beating heart of the bank branch. And so what happens after that is we then go into a pilot. So this is a big international bank with many, many branches. So to immediately scale could be problematic. So what we would do is we would then pilot this for 3 to 6 months. And the information that we then gather is more quantitative quantitative in nature. What's the impact on sales revenue, customer flow? We begin to pull in these other metrics and kind of inform how successful this could be before scaling it, making the decisions to scale this across other branches in Latin America. So there I showed you kind of everything from sketch, prototype, renders through pilot, and how kind of, where prototyping really can fit in before you kind of put something in market. So in a few minutes, we'll just do questions, but I thought just to kind of cap off everything we've seen, I thought I'd recap some tips around some of the things that you've seen. And earlier I asked, what burning questions might you have about your customers? Here's a few tips that you can begin to sketch out and describe and begin to plan your own prototyping. So I've done it as a before, during, and after. So we would always start, as you saw, with the big question or the big idea. And when you're planning a prototype, write it down. What's the concept name? What's the description? And then think about who you're designing for. Pretty obvious, but who's the target? But more specifically, who do you want to show this to? I talked about the difference between showing it to one of your core users or someone that you could really learn from. So someone that doesn't use banks, for example, someone that only uses cash. How do you actually pull them into the system? And what do you want to learn from these people? Then there's the different ways you can express this idea itself. And this may depend on what stage you are in your product development process, your app, whatever you're working on. Is it sketches, or is it the right time to level up in resolution? Are you getting closer to a point where you want to take this out, put it in market, and run a pilot? And how quickly can you prototype this given your budget and time? Then there's the experiment itself. So you saw that all of these are pieces that come together to kind of create a big prototyping experiment. And a lot of logistics go into planning a prototype, and you've got to think about what's the user flow, because you will have to choreograph that experience for the user. You saw how we faked that service at Madison Square Garden, for example. And then finally, what's the feedback that you want to learn? What are the questions that you have? Yes, you want to understand the core value and how that resonates, but what other questions might you have? As you go through your prototypes, make sure that you do something that's manageable. At times, we will probably do maybe 3 or 4 prototypes at once. And Madison Square Garden, for example, we would do 3 experiments at the same time. The bank branch, we ended up, I think, probably doing about 12 concepts over the course of 2 days. So make sure you don't bite off more than you can chew, because logistically it can be very heavy to manage. Be flexible, always be prepared to MacGyver it, because there are times where things just don't go as you planned. When we did our branch experiment in Latin America, I was taking photographs, and a woman was so upset that I was taking photographs of her that we ended up, the situation had to get diffused by the branch manager, because she was kind of upset that I was breaking the rules, and I didn't realize this, but privacy is a big deal in Latin America, and I was taking photographs in a bank branch, which just wasn't cool. So we had to be pretty flexible, and things just happen that you just can't expect or plan for. Understanding deeply really just gets to the idea of make sure the questions you ask aren't just, do you like it, yes or no, but are you giving them space to react to your prototypes? Maybe you can explore with open-ended questions, so that questions that don't just elicit a yes or no answer, but have people also prioritize the ideas that they like. And then always capture quotes and photos. You've seen everything today that I've showed you is just, these are a lot of the things that I've documented myself. I'll take hundreds of photos. I will capture sound, video, and audio just to kind of get a sense in the user's own words as well, what resonated for them. And then finally, after each prototype, make sure you share stories. We have a practice of going around the room and thinking about what was really resonant for us, what really popped, what seemed important, and what should we change. So those are the top 5s. So just in closing, I hope you've learned a few things about the art of prototyping. Make sure you start making and make often. If anyone wants a handout of the slides I just showed you, I'm going to leave my email address up. also Alicia McIver. I'm going to leave my email address up so that you can email me, and I'd be very happy to share some of that stuff with you. But right now, I guess we can move to questions.
All right, thank you so much, Simon. Big round of applause for Simon Heather, please. Some very interesting things right there. So, question time. I'm sure all of you have some very interesting questions. So if you have any questions at all, you can write it in English or ถ้าเกิดมีคำถามนะครับก็สามารถที่จะเขียนเป็นภาษาไทยแล้วก็เดี๋ยวผมจะพยายามแปลให้คุณไซมอนนะครับก็น่าจะมีคำถามอยู่ที่น่าสนใจเยอะมากมายเลยนะครับ So I'll just start out from my questions first. Looking at a lot of designs that you have done, can you give me an example of the most fun or best project that you have done so far that you think it's just really fun to do, because I see all these interesting projects you have.
That's, well, I mean, I've worked on so many projects over my time at IDEO. I think one of the most fun ones I did was working on a luxury credit card brand, very famous kind of expensive credit card, and the user base that we were trying to get to know were very affluent, so millionaires, billionaires, and the research that we did was kind of to emulate that lifestyle, so a little bit crazy, but in order to get empathy for that user base, we kind of immersed ourselves in the world of millionaires and billionaires.
Well, touching more about that, how did you actually go about prototyping this billionaire experience?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I mean,
and who was paying for it?
Yeah, so for that particular project, it was what we would call more of a kind of vision project, where we weren't making, it was more about sketching. But I remember the highlight was taking a helicopter ride into meeting a millionaire's pet giraffe, which was kind of strange and fun.
Okay, well, you've lived in New York, London, and Tokyo, so could you tell me a bit more about that experience in working in those different countries and how that sort of applies to prototyping, and each different country probably has a different kind of prototyping process, possibly?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, different cultures are, I think, comfortable with different levels of it. So in America, it's very scrappy, and people are fine to show things that are, I guess, unrefined. Whereas in Japan, I've seen that there's a tendency to make things more kind of perfect and beautiful, and the idea of failure, perhaps, in Japan is less acceptable. And so that makes it harder to prototype in cultures like, cultures in Tokyo, where, if ideas or if services don't work, they could actually end up looking quite bad for the company. So there's ways we can kind of protect against that by announcing things as experiments and prototypes, and that's something that we'll sometimes do.
Okay, so it seems like you are under a lot of pressure in Tokyo the most, I think, right? Because you're not really allowed to fail. Cultural differences, sometimes. Yeah. Talking about luxury brands, can you tell me a bit more about that? Yeah. Working in the luxury brand industry, and then how you can go about prototyping besides that credit card industry.
Well, I mean, the luxury space, so before I was at IDEO, I used to work in luxury brands, particularly working on British luxury brands and translating them for selling them in Japan, in particular the Japanese market in Tokyo. I worked on Globetrotter, which was a luxury luggage label, Macintosh coats as well, and a number of British brands. We would do prototyping, but it's a different type of prototyping. It's really looking at the expression and the aesthetic. Again, so it's slightly different from the roughness of what you saw earlier on. But at the same time, we did prototype a bespoke service for Globetrotter that was scaled very, very slowly with small numbers of people. Ideas were tested. New elements of the service were brought in a bespoke lounge in London for Globetrotter. So that was something we did over time as well.
Okay, we'll talk about prototyping. How do you think this can be applied to Thai businesses when they prototype their products? I mean, what aspects would you suggest for Thai businesses?
So what I've heard about Thailand is that you can build things very, very quickly here. But what I heard is that to focus on thinking about the right types of questions to ask that you get from your users and the people that you put them in front of. Because behind that lurks the strategy by which you'll design and you'll create products. So I think that's the piece that I think sounds like would be very beneficial to focus on. But the actual act of it, I mean, I've seen in Thailand, like, things move so fast here, and I think people can build stuff very, very quickly. The skill is all there. So I think, like, focusing on the strategy is an interesting thing to do.
Okay, so basically similar to what the Deputy Director General of the Department of International Trade Promotion was saying about you have to know your customer before you design, so have to keep that in mind too. Any questions from the audience members? Any questions at all? Yep, you right here.
So this is a question more about design firms than prototyping.
Yeah.
So I find that design firms are a very good indicator of how innovatively robust an economy is. So I was wondering, just in your opinion, what would it take for IDEO to, say, decide to open IDEO Bangkok?
Ooh. Are you interested in heading up the?
This is a job application.
this has gone in a very different direction than I expected. But I think, you know, it's we do think a lot about, like, the satellite offices, and we have offices in Tokyo. There's one in Shanghai as well. Usually it's a case of, like, what is sustainable for us as a design firm, and are there the clients in the area that need design services. So a lot of the people we work with, a lot of the companies we work with are very mature businesses where they have reached such a level of operationalization that for them to create new ideas and new products, they're beholden to kind of the legacy systems that they are run by, and creating kind of, you know, shareholder value, which makes it difficult for them to be nimble. So perhaps in Thailand we could work in a different capacity where we're working with smaller, more nimble companies looking to create things much faster. But that's a different business model for IDEO as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions? We have a lot of audience members here. Any questions about prototyping, designing, creativity?
Any questions about New York or Japan?
I have a question about your process. Sorry.
Oh, yeah.
I'm over here.
Okay.
Hiding at the back. I'm just wondering how much time and energy you give to inclusivity into your designing process.
To what, sorry? To
inclusivity, so I'm talking about people with disabilities, both mental, both physical. At what point does that come into your design process? And how much time and energy are you spending on that within any different, if it's a service or an environment or a brand or anything that you're designing?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. It's not actually something I guess I've come across before. What was the word you said again?
Inclusivity.
Oh, inclusivity. I couldn't hear it very well. Yeah, I mean, there are definitely, what we tend to do in our process is at the beginning of whatever we're designing, we tend to go very broad and expansive and just forget about any kinds of constraints. We will sort of bring them back in. So that way we can kind of explore new territory and new areas of thinking, and then we'll dial things back into what's realistic. And I think from something like inclusivity, when it comes to designing environments, that's something that would probably come in towards the end once we've explored this. You know, the banking branch thing, for example, is around learning. That's the kind of core value prop that we're designing for, and then we think about, like, the constraints as applied later on that maybe kind of reshape and redirect some of the core value to kind of emerge in different ways. I know that sounds kind of abstract, but I guess it is.
We have more questions right here. What is the difference between proof of concept and prototyping? So that's probably a generic term in design, right?
Yeah, I mean,
proof of concept and prototyping.
I mean, with terminology like that, you know, proof of concept, you could say, basically, I think when you're getting some early validation towards your idea, the particular kind of design we do at IDEO is really human-centered. It's different from, say, like a fashion designer where it's personality-driven and it's top-down. We're very much bottoms-up kind of design, designing for people. And in some ways, that's kind of democratic design. And so for us, like the idea of a proof of concept is when people really buy into the idea and you're getting good reactions, you're getting good positive feedback. And I guess that could exist at different stages, whether it's early on when you're getting validation and towards some sketches that you're working on, to later on when you're in pilot mode and you're seeing really good numbers coming back that give you confidence that you can scale the idea. So I guess like the proof of concept is really just in some ways a metric by which you would measure success.
So basically proof of concept is after prototyping then, kind of, if it works.
I think so, but
Okay.
normally we may, in something like prototyping, you're probably going to want to set some metrics ahead of time by which to measure success. For us, earlier on, it's very much qualitative. It's that user feedback. It tends to be conversations that you're having with individuals, and you're seeing what they really love or what they really like about something you're working on, and just exploring that more deeply.
โอเคคำถามภาษาไทยก็ได้นะครับเดี๋ยวผมแปลให้ไม่มีปัญหามีไหมครับ Okay. Well, I think that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Simon Heather. Big round of applause, please, for Simon Heather. If you have any questions, you can also email him.
Please email me.
It's not on screen right now, but sheather@ideo.com. So we're going to take a quick break for 10 minutes. We'll be right back after 10 minutes. And then for those of you who haven't filled out the evaluation form, each session we have an evaluation form for you to fill out, and that pretty much encompasses all the sessions. So we have one evaluation form for you to fill out, and then you can bring it outside to the registration area. We'll take a 10-minute break, and we'll be right back. Thank you.